My name is Lorraine Mitchell, and am 53 years old. Right now, I'm standing on a stage under blinding spotlights, wearing the blue dress I spent my entire month's savings on, while hundreds of wealthy strangers laugh at me. My son Brett just grabbed the microphone and announced to the entire ballroom, "Ladies and gentlemen, for my next auction item, I present something truly unique. My boring mom. She's old-fashioned, she's embarrassing, but hey, maybe someone out there needs a charity case." Starting bid, $1. The crowd erupted in cruel laughter, and I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces as I recognized faces in the audience. Brett's colleagues, society elites, people I'd smiled at earlier tonight, all of them laughing at the woman who'd sacrificed everything for the man now mocking her. Then, cutting through the noise like a blade, a deep voice from the back of the ballroom said, $1 million. The room fell dead silent. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens when a mother's worst betrayal becomes her greatest liberation. Now, let me take you back to how I ended up on that stage. 12 years ago, my husband Gerald Mitchell died in a construction accident that left me with not just grief, but crushing debt from his failed business venture. Gerald had been a dreamer, always chasing the next big idea, and his last project collapsed just months before his death, leaving us owing nearly $80,000 to banks and investors. I was 41 years old, suddenly widowed, with a 16-year-old son to raise and a mountain of financial obligations that threatened to bury us both. I had two choices: declare bankruptcy and lose everything, including our small house, or work myself to the bone to pay it all back. I chose the latter because I wanted Brett to have stability, to finish high school without the shame of homelessness, to believe that hard work and integrity mattered more than taking the easy way out. For the next 12 years, I worked 3 jobs simultaneously. During the day, I was a bookkeeper at Henderson & Associates law firm, a respectable position that paid decently but not enough to cover our mounting expenses. In the evenings, I waitressed at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street, smiling through exhaustion as I served coffee and burgers to customers who sometimes left generous tips that I'd immediately deposit into Brett's college fund. On weekends, I cleaned houses for wealthy families in the suburbs, scrubbing their toilets and mopping their floors while they enjoyed their comfortable lives, never knowing that the woman on her knees in their bathrooms had once dreamed of being an architect, of designing beautiful buildings that would stand for generations. I gave up that dream the day Gerald died because dreams don't pay bills or put food on the table or send your son to a prestigious university. I survived on instant noodles and thrift store clothes while Brett had new laptops for school, study abroad trips to Europe, fraternity fees at Hartwell University, and a used car that I scraped together money to repair every time it broke down. I never told him how many meals I skipped so he could eat steak at his fraternity dinners, never mentioned that my winter coat had holes in the lining that I patched with duct tape, never complained when he called from college, asking for extra money because his friends were going skiing and he didn't want to be left out. I thought I was teaching him the value of sacrifice, showing him what unconditional love looked like, building a foundation of gratitude that would make him a good man. I was wrong about so many things. Brett used to be sweet, the kind of child who made Mother's Day cards with crayons and brought me dandelions from the yard, calling them flowers fit for a queen. He'd sit with me after Gerald's funeral, holding my hand, promising that we'd take care of each other forever. But something changed after college, especially after he landed a job at Donovan Capital Group, an elite investment firm where junior associates drove luxury cars and spent weekends at country clubs. He started dating Sloane Pemberton, the daughter of Victor Pemberton, a senior partner at the firm, and suddenly my son, who used to call me every Sunday, disappeared into a world of expensive suits and networking events where mothers like me didn't fit the carefully curated image. The calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether unless he needed something. When I visited his apartment once, unannounced, he met me at the door and wouldn't let me inside, saying he had important guests, and I looked too tired to make a good impression. The cruel comments started slowly, little cuts disguised as jokes. "Mom, you really need to update your wardrobe. Those clothes went out of style 20 years ago. Can you not tell your boring work stories when I have friends over? Why do you have to be so embarrassing all the time?" Each comment was a small wound, but I told myself he was just stressed from work, that he didn't mean it, that my boy was still in there somewhere beneath the designer labels and the contempt. I kept loving him, kept believing that one day he'd remember everything he'd done, that he'd come back to me. 2 weeks before the gala, he called and said, "Mom, I'm hosting a charity event at the Grandview Hotel. It's a huge career opportunity for me. I need you there." My heart soared because I thought this was it, the moment when Brett finally wanted to include me in his life, to show me off to his colleagues and friends, to publicly acknowledge the sacrifices I'd made. I spent an entire month's grocery budget on the blue dress, got my hair professionally styled for the first time in 5 years, and practiced small talk in front of my bathroom mirror so I wouldn't embarrass him. When I arrived at the Grandview Hotel that night, walking into a ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers and people dripping in diamonds, I felt out of place but hopeful. I sat alone at a back table, watching Brett network with ease, watching Sloane hang on his arm in her designer gown, watching the auction unfold as wealthy donors bid thousands of dollars on luxury vacations and vintage wines. Then Brett took the stage, and I thought he was going to thank me, to tell everyone about his hard-working mother who'd given him every opportunity. Instead, he looked right at me and said, "My next item is unique, my mother. She's boring, she's old-fashioned, but hey, someone might want her." Starting bid, $1. The crowd exploded in laughter, and I stood frozen on that stage, every cell in my body screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Sloane in the front row laughed the hardest, whispering to her friends and pointing at me like I was a circus act. Brett's face showed no remorse, only smug satisfaction, as if humiliating me publicly was the punchline to a joke I didn't understand. That's when the voice from the back said, $1 million, and my life changed forever. The silence that followed that bid was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the back entrance, where a tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit stood framed in the doorway like something out of a movie. He had silver-gray hair, sharp features that spoke of both strength and weariness, and a commanding presence that made even the wealthiest people in the room straighten their postures. He walked forward with measured steps, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor, and I noticed that his eyes never left mine, as if everyone else in the room had ceased to exist. Brett's smug expression transformed into confusion, then alarm, as this stranger approached the stage with the confidence of someone who owned the building, and everyone in it. Brett stammered into the microphone, his voice cracking with panic. "I'm sorry, sir, but this was just a joke. My mother isn't actually for sale. This is all a misunderstanding." The stranger stopped at the foot of the stage, looked up at Brett with eyes colder than winter steel, and said in a voice that carried effortlessly across the silent ballroom, "A joke? You publicly auctioned your mother with a starting bid of $1 in front of hundreds of witnesses. I'm offering $1 million, that's the highest bid. In charity auctions, the highest bid wins, does it not?" A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd, some people shocked, others leaning forward with the kind of interest people have when they sense drama unfolding. Victor Pemberton stood up from his front row seat, his face darkening with disapproval as he called out, "Young man, who are you? This is a private event." The stranger turned to face Victor with unhurried grace and replied, "My name is Silas Harrington. I was invited by the hotel management as a potential donor to your organization. I am the CEO of Harrington Global Enterprises." The gasp that went through the crowd was audible because everyone in that room knew that name. Harrington Global was one of the most powerful corporations in the country, worth billions, with interests in technology, real estate, and international trade. This wasn't just a wealthy man. This was one of the most influential business leaders in the nation, and had just bid $1 million for me. Brett's face went from pale to green as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. Sloane looked like she might faint, her perfectly made-up face frozen in horror. Silas climbed the stage steps with the ease of someone accustomed to being wherever he chose to be, extended his hand to me, and said, "Mrs. Mitchell, if you'll come with me." His hand was warm and steady, and I took it without thinking, my body moving on autopilot because my brain had shut down from shock. He led me down the stairs, past hundreds of staring faces, past Brett, who stood frozen at the microphone like a statue, past Sloane, whose mouth hung open in a way that would have made her etiquette coach weep. At the event coordinator's table, Silas pulled out a checkbook, wrote with swift, precise strokes, tore out the check, and handed it to the stunned coordinator. $1 million for your charity, as promised, he said. Then he turned to Brett, who had finally unfrozen and followed us, and said in a voice that made grown men flinch, "And you, young man, just sold your mother. I hope you can live with that." We walked out of the ballroom together, my hand still in his, and I felt hundreds of eyes burning into my back, but I didn't care, because for the first time that night, I could breathe. His limousine waited outside, a sleek black vehicle with a driver who opened the door without needing instruction. We sat in silence for several minutes as the car pulled away from the Grandview Hotel, leaving behind the wreckage of my relationship with my son. Finally, I found my voice and asked, "Why did you do that? You don't even know me." Silas turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't expected. Deep, bone-aching sadness mixed with grim satisfaction. "I know enough," he said. "I know a mother who sacrificed everything being humiliated by an ungrateful son. I know injustice when I see it, and I know that sometimes the universe gives us a chance to make right what we once made wrong," I whispered. "But $1 million for a joke, for a woman you've never met," he interrupted gently, "is a small price to teach an important lesson." He handed me a business card, heavy stock with embossed lettering. "I've arranged for you to stay at the Riverside Hotel tonight. Tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like to meet with you to discuss how I can help you rebuild from what your son just did. But tonight, you need rest." The car stopped in front of an elegant hotel, and the driver opened my door. Silas said, "Mrs. Mitchell, what happened tonight was not your fault, and it was not your shame. It was his. Don't carry what belongs to him." Then he was gone, and I was standing in a hotel lobby, still wearing my blue dress, holding a business card from a billionaire who'd just paid $1 million to rescue me from my own son's cruelty. I barely slept that night in the hotel room that Silas had paid for, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the gala in my head like a nightmare loop I couldn't escape. When morning finally came, I returned to my small apartment in the run-down part of town, the place I'd called home for 12 years because it was all I could afford while paying off Gerald's debts and funding Brett's future. My phone showed 15 missed calls from Brett, and as I stood in my tiny kitchen trying to process everything, someone pounded on my door so hard I thought it might break off its hinges. I opened it to find Brett standing there, still wearing his tuxedo from the night before. His hair disheveled, his face contorted with rage that made him look like a stranger. He stormed past me into my apartment, knocking over the small table where I kept my mail, and whirled around shouting, "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stood there, still in shock, and said quietly, "What I've done? Brett, you auctioned me for $1 in front of hundreds of people." He laughed, but it was a harsh, cruel sound without any humor. "It was a joke, Mom, a joke. You're so sensitive, so incapable of understanding how things work in my world. But now you've ruined everything." He paced my small living room like a caged animal, and I noticed his hands were shaking. Whether from anger or fear, I couldn't tell. Victor Pemberton called me this morning. He said I'm being re-evaluated for my position because of what he called the incident. "Do you understand? My career is on the line because you made a scene with that Harrington guy." I tried to explain that I didn't make a scene, that Silas acted on his own, that I was as shocked as everyone else. But Brett wasn't listening. He grabbed my shoulders, and for a moment I saw something wild and desperate in his eyes that frightened me. "You need to fix this," he demanded. "Call Harrington, give back the money, tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. Apologize for embarrassing me. You owe me that much after everything I've done for you." I stared at him, this man who'd once been my sweet boy, and said, "Everything you've done for me? Brett, I worked 3 jobs for 12 years to give you the life you have." He dropped his hands and sneered, "And I never asked you to do that. That was your choice. Don't put that guilt on me." Then he left, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall and shattered on the floor. Within hours, I discovered that Brett had launched what I can only call a smear campaign. He posted on his social media accounts, which had thousands of followers from his business connections, heartbroken to share that my mother embarrassed our family at my charity gala by throwing a tantrum and manipulating a wealthy stranger for money. Some people will do anything for attention and cash, praying she gets the help she needs. The post went viral, shared hundreds of times by people who didn't know me, didn't know the truth, but were eager to participate in the spectacle of a supposedly greedy mother caught red-handed. Sloane Pemberton shared it with her own commentary. "Some people will do anything for money. So sad to see a son betrayed by the person who should love him most." Comments poured in calling me a gold digger, a manipulator, a terrible mother who'd raised a good son despite her own failings. My phone started ringing constantly with numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters wanted comments about the Gala scandal, asking me invasive questions about my relationship with Silas, implying that I'd seduced him or planned the whole encounter. Strangers sent me messages ranging from cruel mockery to outright threats, people telling me I should be ashamed, that I was scum, that I deserved to die alone. I turned off my phone and sat in my apartment, feeling the walls close in around me, wondering how my life had spiraled so completely out of control in less than 24 hours. The worst part wasn't the strangers, it was seeing people I knew, neighbors and acquaintances, sharing Brett's posts with comments like I always knew there was something off about her, or poor Brett. Having to deal with that, Monday morning arrived, and I dragged myself to work at Henderson and Associates law firm, hoping that the familiar routine would provide some anchor to normalcy. I'd worked there for 8 years, always punctual, always reliable, handling complex financial records for high-profile cases. Mr. Henderson had always praised my attention to detail, my discretion, my professionalism. But that Monday, 20 minutes after I arrived, his assistant called me into his office with an expression of pity that made my stomach drop. Mr. Henderson couldn't meet my eyes as he said, "Lorraine, I'm very sorry, but we've received complaints from several clients who saw the news coverage of the weekend's events. They're concerned about the firm's reputation, about having someone involved in such a public scandal handling sensitive financial information. We have to let you go." I pleaded with him, my voice breaking as I explained that I'd done nothing wrong, that my son had created a false narrative, that I'd been a loyal employee for nearly a decade. Mr. Henderson handed me an envelope with 2 weeks of severance pay and said, "But our clients are powerful people who care deeply about appearances. I can't risk losing them." I walked out of that office in a daze, carrying the small box of personal items from my desk, past colleagues who wouldn't look at me, past the reception area where I'd greeted clients 1,000 times. Brett's campaign to destroy my reputation had cost me my livelihood, and I knew the other jobs would follow. The diner wouldn't want the controversy, and the families I cleaned for certainly wouldn't want scandal associated with their pristine homes. When I returned to my apartment that afternoon, I found an eviction notice taped to my door. I was 2 months behind on rent, having spent the money on Brett's gala outfit and other expenses I'd convinced myself were investments in our relationship. The notice gave me 30 days to pay the back rent plus fees or vacate the premises. I stood there holding that piece of paper. My job gone. My son spreading lies about me, strangers threatening me online, and my home about to disappear. And for the first time in my life, I understood what people meant when they said they couldn't take any more. I sat on my floor surrounded by the ruins of everything I'd built and thought about giving up, about just disappearing, about letting Brett win because what was the point of fighting when you had nothing left? Then I remembered the business card in my purse, the one Silas Harrington had given me. I pulled it out with trembling fingers, stared at the embossed lettering, and thought about Theodore Chen's mother Margaret, Who'd sent me that letter telling me to fight? I thought about all the years I'd survived, on nothing but determination and love for a son who'd thrown it all away. I thought about the woman I used to be before grief and exhaustion ground me down into someone who accepted crumbs of affection and called it love. I picked up my phone, turned it back on despite the flood of notifications, and dialed the number on Silas Harrington's card. His assistant Judith answered on the second ring, her voice professional but warm, and when I gave my name, she said, "Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Harrington has been expecting your call. Can you come to our offices this afternoon at 2?" I agreed, hung up, and spent the next hour trying to make myself presentable, washing my face that was puffy from crying, changing into the nicest clothes I owned that weren't the blue dress I never wanted to see again. I took the bus downtown to the financial district, watching the city pass by through grimy windows, wondering what Silas really wanted, whether this was charity or pity or something else I couldn't name. The Harrington Global Building was a gleaming 60-story tower of steel and glass that dominated the skyline, the kind of building I used to dream about designing when I believed I could be an architect. Security checked my identification, made a phone call, then escorted me to a private elevator that required a key card to access the executive floors. The elevator was so smooth I barely felt it moving, and soft classical music played as floor numbers climbed higher than it'd ever been in my life. When the doors opened, Judith stood waiting, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a smile that actually reached them. She led me through corridors decorated with modern art worth more than I'd earn in several lifetimes, past offices where important-looking people had important-looking conversations, to massive double doors at the end of the hall. Silas' office was beyond anything I'd imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city, giving the impression of standing in the sky itself. Mahogany furniture gleamed under recessed lighting, and the walls displayed awards, photographs of Silas with presidents and world leaders, framed articles about Harrington Global's achievements. But what struck me most was Silas himself, standing by the windows in casual slacks and a sweater, looking less like a billionaire CEO and more like someone's kind uncle. He turned when I entered, smiled gently, and said, "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. Would you like tea? Coffee?" I chose tea because my hands needed something to hold, something to keep them from shaking. We sat in comfortable chairs near the windows, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Finally, I said what I'd come to ask. "I need to understand why you really helped me. Nobody pays $1 million for a stranger out of simple kindness." Silas set down his own teacup and leaned back, his eyes distant as if looking at something far away in time. "You're right," he said. "It wasn't simple kindness. It was atonement." He paused, gathering words or maybe courage, then continued. 35 years ago, I was Brett." Those 4 words hung in the air between us, and I waited for him to explain. "I grew up poor," Silas said, his voice steady but carrying undertones of old pain. "My father left when I was 3, and my mother Dorothy raised me alone in a 2-room apartment in the worst part of Chicago. She worked as a seamstress, taking in alterations and making clothes for people who paid her pennies for work worth dollars. She had arthritis in her hands that made every stitch painful, but she never complained, never stopped. Because everything she did was for me." His voice softened when he said his mother's name, and I saw moisture gathering in his eyes. "She sacrificed everything so I could go to school, could have opportunities she never had. When I got a scholarship to Northwestern University, she was so proud she cried for 3 days straight. When I graduated and landed my first job at an investment bank, she threw a party in our cramped apartment and invited everyone she knew." Silas stood and walked to the window, his back to me as he continued. "But I was ashamed. My colleagues came from wealth, from families with summer homes and trust funds and connections. I started lying about my background, saying my mother was a fashion designer instead of a seamstress, that we came from comfortable circumstances. Then one night, the bank hosted a dinner for new employees and their families. I brought my mother because she begged to come, to see where I worked, to meet my new world. She wore a dress shed made herself, proud of her work, but it was clearly homemade, clearly cheap fabric. One of my colleagues, a guy named Richard from Old Money, made a joke about the dress. He said it looked like something from a thrift store, and everyone at the table laughed. He turned back to face me, and I saw tears on his cheeks. God help me, I laughed the loudest. Then I made my own jokes, said my mother was embarrassing, that she didn't understand high society, that I wished I'd come from a better family. My mother sat there and heard every word. She didn't say anything, didn't defend herself, just sat there with this look on her face like something inside her had died. We took a cab home in silence, and when we got to her apartment, she looked at me and said, I don't know who you are anymore, but you're not my son. Then she closed the door, and I never saw her again. Silas sat back down, his hands trembling as he picked up his tea. She refused my calls, returned my letters unopened, moved to a different apartment without telling me the address. I told myself she was being dramatic, that she'd come around eventually, that I had more important things to focus on like my career. 2 years later, I got a call from a hospital. My mother had a heart attack while working late on a rush order for a wedding dress. She died alone in that hospital with none of her belongings, no family, nothing but the clothes she was wearing and the needle she'd been using when her heart gave out. She was 56 years old. The silence that followed was heavy with ghosts. I whispered, I'm so sorry. Silas wiped his eyes and said, I built an empire after that, made billions, became one of the most powerful men in the country, but none of it mattered because I couldn't undo what I'd done. I couldn't apologize to the woman who'd given me everything. When I saw Brett on that stage, treating you the way I treated my mother, I saw myself. When I saw you standing there with that look of devastation, I saw Dorothy. I can't save my mother, Mrs. Mitchell, but maybe I could save you. Maybe I could stop another son from making the mistake that destroyed my life. I sat there absorbing his story, understanding now why a stranger had paid $1 million, why Head stepped in when everyone else just laughed. This wasn't charity. It was a man trying to balance cosmic scales that could never truly be balanced. Silas cleared his throat and said, which brings me to why I asked you here. I want to help you rebuild your life, not as charity but as partnership. I've watched you these past few days, seen how Brett tried to destroy you, how you've lost your job, and possibly your home. I'm offering you a position here at Harrington Global as my executive assistant with a salary of $150,000 per year. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. But I'm not qualified for that kind of position. I'm a bookkeeper, not a corporate executive. Silas smiled, and it transformed his face from stern to almost boyish. You're a woman who managed complex financial records for a law firm, who coordinated 3 jobs simultaneously for 12 years, who balanced impossible schedules and still managed to raise a child alone. You're meticulous, discreet, and you understand sacrifice, which means you understand what really matters. You're overqualified for what you've been doing, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm offering you a chance to prove that to yourself and everyone else. He continued, I'm also offering a company apartment until you find permanent housing, access to our legal team to fight the eviction and handle Brett's defamation, and whatever support you need to rebuild what he tried to tear down. I wanted to accept immediately, but fear held me back. If I accept this, I prove Brett right. Everyone will say I manipulated you, that I'm a gold digger who used him to get to you. Silas leaned forward, his eyes intense. Let them say it. You and I will know the truth. Besides, Mrs. Mitchell, your son already destroyed your reputation. The only way out is through. You can either hide and let his lies define you, or you can stand up, take this opportunity, and show the world who you really are. The choice is yours. I thought about Margaret Chen's letter, about fighting instead of surrendering, about the woman I used to be before life ground me down. I thought about my dreams of being an architect, of creating something meaningful, of being more than just someone's mother or someone's employee. I looked at Silas Harrington, this man haunted by regrets, offering me a chance at redemption we both needed. I took a deep breath and said, Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. For 3 weeks, I barely thought about Brett, except in those quiet moments before sleep when the hurt would resurface like a wound that wouldn't quite heal. I threw myself into learning everything about Harrington Global's operations, studying files late into the night, memorizing the names and roles of hundreds of employees, understanding the complex web of international business that Silas navigated daily. I discovered I had a talent for seeing patterns in data, for organizing chaos into coherent systems, for anticipating needs before they arose. Silas praised my work, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was becoming someone again instead of just surviving. Then Brett saw the Business Journal article. It was a small piece in the professional section, nothing major, just a standard announcement. Harrington Global appoints new executive assistant to CEO. It included a professional photograph that the company had taken of me in a well-fitted suit, looking confident and competent, unrecognizable from the broken woman who'd stood on a gala stage 3 weeks earlier. According to Judith, who heard it from someone who heard it from someone else, Brett had been in a coffee shop when he saw the article, and had thrown his cup across the room in rage before storming out without paying. His career had collapsed in the aftermath of the Gala scandal. Victor Pemberton hadn't fired him immediately, but had demoted him from junior associate to what was essentially an intern position, stripping away his prestigious clients and meaningful projects. Sloane had broken up with him via text message, saying he was too controversial and that her father would never approve of their relationship continuing. Brett's carefully constructed image as a rising star in finance had shattered, replaced by whispers about his character, his judgment, his complete lack of values. Several colleagues who'd been at the gala had quietly spread the word about what really happened, and while some people still believed Brett's version of events, enough knew the truth to make his professional life unbearable. When he saw that I wasn't just surviving but thriving, that I'd landed a position more prestigious than anything had ever achieved, something inside Brett snapped. He contacted a lawyer named Roland Pierce, a man known throughout the city for ruthless tactics and willingness to pursue cases other attorneys considered ethically questionable. Together, they crafted a lawsuit that was filed exactly 4 weeks after the gala, delivered to my new office by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed me the thick envelope of legal documents. The lawsuit claimed that I had caused Brett severe emotional distress and defamation of character through my calculated manipulation of Silas Harrington at the gala, and it demanded $500,000 in damages, plus a public apology, admitting my wrongdoing. The media frenzy that followed made the initial gala coverage look tame by comparison. Headlines screamed SONSU's mother, after charity scandal and family feud turns legal in million-dollar drama. Television news programs devoted segments to analyzing the case, bringing in legal experts and psychologists to discuss parent-child relationships and public humiliation. Brett appeared on morning talk shows, looking earnest and wounded, telling carefully edited versions of our story that painted him as a devoted son betrayed by a mother who'd abandoned family values for money and status. He showed childhood photographs of us together, moments I'd cherished, twisting them into evidence of my supposed coldness and distance. One particular interview made me physically ill. Brett sat across from a sympathetic host, tears streaming down his face as he said, "My mother was never really there for me emotionally. After my father died, she threw herself into work and I was left alone to grieve. I organized that gala as a way to reconnect with her, to include her in my world, but she couldn't handle not being the center of attention. When Mr. Harrington made his bid, she saw an opportunity to trade her family for wealth, and she took it without hesitation. Now she's turned her back on me completely, living in luxury while I struggled to rebuild my life after she destroyed my reputation." The host nodded sympathetically, asking leading questions that allowed Brett to portray himself as the abandoned child rather than the cruel son, and I wanted to scream at the television that none of it was true. Public opinion fractured into camps. Some people saw through Brett's manipulation, writing articles and social media posts defending me, pointing out inconsistencies in his story, and highlighting the cruelty of auctioning one's mother for $1. But others bought his narrative completely, sending me hate mail calling me a terrible mother, a gold digger, a woman who had raised her son only to abandon him when something better came along. The comment sections of every article about the case filled with vicious debates, strangers arguing about my character based on nothing but speculation and Brett's lies. I stopped reading the news, stopped checking social media, tried to focus on my work while my personal life burned down around me again. Silas assigned his top attorney to my defense, a woman named Evelyn Cross who had a reputation for being absolutely merciless in court. Evelyn was in her 50s, with steel gray hair cut short and sharp eyes that seemed to see through any deception. She came to my apartment with boxes of files and a team of investigators, and she spent hours interviewing me about every detail of my relationship with Brett, my finances, my sacrifices, everything. She was thorough to the point of being invasive, but I understood why when she explained, "Brett is going to attack your character from every possible angle. We need to know everything so there are no surprises in court. The truth is our weapon, and I intend to use it ruthlessly." Her investigators discovered evidence that contradicted Brett's claims at every turn. They found letters had written me from college, beautiful letters thanking me for my sacrifices, calling me his hero, promising to make me proud and take care of me when he succeeded. They pulled financial records, showing every dollar Id spent on his education, his living expenses, his fraternity fees, his study abroad programs, his car repairs. They interviewed former neighbors who testified about the years they'd watched me leave before dawn and return after dark, working myself to exhaustion, while Brett enjoyed opportunities most children only dreamed about. They found Brett's old social media posts, from before Head deleted them, where Head bragged about his amazing mom who worked multiple jobs to give him everything. But the most damaging discovery came from interviewing Brett's former colleagues at Donovan Capital Group. Several of them, speaking confidentially at first and then agreeing to testify, revealed that Brett had been under investigation for falsifying reports and cutting corners on client accounts. Victor Pemberton had been building a case to fire him even before the gala, and the public humiliation of his mother had simply provided a convenient excuse to accelerate the process. Brett's career hadn't been destroyed by me. It had been collapsing under the weight of his own incompetence and dishonesty long before Silas Harrington ever entered the picture. While Evelyn built our case, my extended family began turning against me. My sister Maureen called from Arizona, her voice cold and accusatory. "Lorraine, Brett came to visit me last week. He told me everything about how you've changed, how the money corrupted you, how you're not the sister I used to know. How could you turn your back on your own son?" I tried to explain what really happened, but Maureen interrupted. "He showed me the lawsuit papers. The fact that your own child had to sue you should tell you everything. You need to drop that fancy job, apologize to Brett, and fix this family before it's too late." She hung up before I could respond, and that night she posted on social media supporting Brett, calling me selfish and materialistic. My cousin Phyllis, whom Id helped financially numerous times over the years, shared Brett's interview with a caption, "Family should come first, always. So sad to see what money does to people." Other relatives I barely knew crawled out of the woodwork to offer their opinions on my character. People I'd never been there during the hard years. Wad never offered to help when I was working 3 jobs and raising a child alone. They painted themselves as arbiters of family values, judging me from the comfort of their own stable lives, never acknowledging that Brett had auctioned his mother for $1 in front of hundreds of people. The narrative Brett had created was so compelling, so appealing to people's assumptions about ungrateful children and money-hungry parents, that my truth couldn't compete. The night before our first court hearing, I sat alone in my beautiful apartment, watching the city lights shimmer across the water, feeling more isolated than Id ever felt in the cramped place I used to call home. My phone rang, and I almost didn't answer, expecting another reporter or angry relative. But the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, and something made me pick up. A woman's voice, elderly and warm, said, "Mrs. Mitchell? My name is Margaret Chen. You don't know me, but I saw your story on the news, and I had to call." She paused, then continued. 20 years ago, my daughter did something very similar to what your son did. She publicly humiliated me, sued me for money I didn't have, turned my whole family against me, and I gave up. I let her win because I was tired and broken and I couldn't fight anymore. Margaret's voice cracked with emotion as she said, "That was the biggest regret of my life. I spent the last 20 years living in shame, carrying guilt that wasn't mine, dying a little bit every day because I'd let my daughter convince me I was worthless. 3 months ago, my son Theodore found me and tried to reconcile, tried to tell me it wasn't my fault, but it was too late. I'm dying, Mrs. Mitchell. Cancer. And I'll die carrying regret that I didn't fight, that I didn't stand up for myself when it mattered." She took a shaky breath and said, "Don't make my mistake. Don't let your son take your dignity along with everything else. Fight, Mrs. Mitchell. Fight like your life depends on it, because it does." She hung up, and I sat there holding the phone, tears streaming down my face, understanding that this stranger had just given me the greatest gift anyone could give. The courage to keep going when giving up seemed easier. The courtroom was everything I'd seen in movies, but somehow more intimidating in reality, with dark wood paneling and high ceilings that made everyone inside feel small and exposed. Judge Constance Walters presided from her bench with an expression of stern impartiality, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The jury box held 12 people who would decide my fate. Ordinary citizens pulled from their lives to judge a family drama they couldn't possibly fully understand. Brett's lawyer, Roland Pierce, was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive suit, theatrical gestures, and a smile that never reached his calculating eyes. Evelyn Cross sat beside me, radiating quiet confidence, her hands folded calmly on the table while I fought to keep mine from trembling. Brett took the stand first, and I barely recognized him. Had styled himself to look younger, more vulnerable, wearing a simple suit instead of his usual designer labels. His hair slightly messy, as if he'd been too distraught to care about appearances. Roland Pierce led him through a carefully crafted narrative that bore only passing resemblance to reality. "Mr. Mitchell, can you describe your childhood after your father's death?" Brett's voice quavered as he answered, "It was lonely. My mother was never there emotionally. She worked all the time, and I understood she had to, but I needed her, and she just wasn't available. I raised myself, really." He paused to wipe his eyes, and I saw several jurors leaning forward sympathetically. "The night of the gala," Roland continued. "Can you tell the court what your intentions were?" Brett looked directly at the jury and said, "I wanted to honor my mother, to show her off to my colleagues and friends, to finally include her in my success. The auction was meant to be a light-hearted moment, a fun way to recognize her in front of everyone. I was going to bid high myself, make a big show of how much I valued her. But before I could, Mr. Harrington made his bid, and my mother left with him without even looking back at me. She chose money over her own son in front of hundreds of witnesses." Several jurors nodded, and my heart sank because his performance was convincing, his lies wrapped in just enough truth to seem believable. Roland Pierce played the emotional card hard, asking Brett about his current struggles, his lost job, his broken engagement, all framed as consequences of my supposed betrayal. Brett cried on the stand, real tears that I suspected came from self-pity rather than genuine remorse, and he delivered his closing statement with perfect theatrical timing. "I just want my mother back. The woman I knew would never have chosen wealth and status over her own family. Mr. Harrington's money changed her, corrupted her, turned her into someone I don't recognize. All I'm asking for is acknowledgement of the pain she's caused and some compensation for the career she destroyed." Is that too much for a son to ask from his mother? Sloane Pemberton testified next, and I was surprised Shed agreed given that Shed broken up with Brett. But as she took the stand, I understood her motivation. She was testifying to salvage her own reputation, to show that Shed been deceived by Brett just like everyone else. She portrayed herself as an innocent bystander caught in family drama, confirming Brett's version of events at the gala while carefully distancing herself from him personally. "Brett always spoke highly of his mother before that night," she said, her voice saccharine with false sympathy. "He seemed devoted to her. I was shocked by what happened at the gala, both by his poor judgment in making that joke and by Mrs. Mitchell's response. It was all very unfortunate for everyone involved. Then came the moment that nearly destroyed our entire case. Roland Pierce presented what he called definitive proof of my premeditated conspiracy with Silas Harrington. Emails allegedly sent from my personal email account to Silas' company address 2 weeks before the gala, outlining a plan to stage a dramatic rescue in exchange for financial compensation and employment. The emails were detailed and damning, discussing timing, emotional manipulation tactics, and projected outcomes. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and I saw the jurors' expressions shift from sympathy to suspicion. I wanted to scream that those emails were lies, that I'd never contacted Silas before the gala, that this was all fabricated, but Evelyn put a steady hand on my arm and whispered, "Stay calm. We've got this." Judge Walters ordered a recess to allow both legal teams to examine the evidence more closely. In a private conference room, Evelyn's digital forensics expert, a young man named Marcus who looked like he belonged in a tech startup rather than a courtroom, pulled up the emails on his laptop and started analyzing metadata with flying fingers. After 20 minutes of tense silence broken only by keyboard clicks, Marcus looked up with a grim smile and said, "These emails were created 3 days ago, not 2 weeks before the gala. The metadata has been clumsily altered, but whoever did it didn't understand how email systems timestamp data at multiple points. I can prove these are forgeries beyond any reasonable doubt." When court reconvened, Evelyn stood and addressed Judge Walters with ice in her voice. "Your Honor, the defense moves to strike the email evidence as fabricated. Our forensics expert has prepared a detailed analysis showing that these emails were created days ago, not weeks before the alleged events, and that attempts were made to alter the timestamps." She projected Marcus' findings on screens visible to the entire courtroom, walking through the technical evidence with clarity that even non-experts could understand. Judge Walters' face darkened with fury as she turned to Roland Pierce and said, "Counsel, you submitted falsified evidence to this court. Do you have an explanation?" Roland Pierce, for the first time, looked genuinely rattled. He stammered, "Your Honor, these documents were provided to us by my client. We believed them to be authentic. We would never knowingly submit false evidence." But his protestations rang hollow, and Judge Walters wasn't having it. "Whether you created these forgeries yourself or simply failed to verify evidence before presenting it, the result is the same. You have wasted this court's time and attempted to pervert justice. We will address sanctions after the conclusion of this trial. Continue with your case, but know that your credibility is now in serious question." The momentum had shifted, and it was time for our counterattack. I took the stand with my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it, but Evelyn's calm presence gave me strength. She led me through my story gently but thoroughly, starting with Gerald's death and the crushing debt head left behind, moving through 12 years of sacrifice, documented with bank statements and pay stubs that showed every penny earned and where it went. I described working 3 jobs, going hungry so Brett could eat, buying nothing for myself while funding his education and lifestyle. I read aloud from the letters Brett had written me from college, his own words thanking me for my love and support, calling me his hero, promising to make me proud. When we reached the night of the gala, I let myself be vulnerable in a way I'd never been in public before. I described the hope I'd felt when Brett invited me, the excitement of finally being included in his life, the devastating humiliation of standing on that stage while my own son mocked me for $1. I didn't cry because my tears had all been used up over the past months, but my voice broke when I said, I didn't sacrifice for gratitude or repayment. I did it because I loved him. I still love him, which is why this hurts so much. A stranger paid $1 million for me because he saw my value. My own son thought I was worth $1, and then he blamed me for the consequences of his own cruelty. Evelyn ended my testimony by addressing the lawsuit directly. Mrs. Mitchell, has your employment with Harrington Global changed you in the ways your son claims? I looked at the jury and said, it's given me the first security I've had in 12 years. It's shown me that I have skills and value beyond being someone's mother or someone's bookkeeper. But it hasn't changed my core values. I still believe in hard work, in integrity, in treating people with dignity, The only thing that's changed is that I no longer accept mistreatment as proof of love. If that makes me a different person, then perhaps it's a person I should have been all along." Silas Harrington took the stand next, and the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath because everyone wanted to hear from the mysterious billionaire at the center of this drama. Roland Pierce tried to portray him as a manipulator who'd taken advantage of a vulnerable woman, but Silas' calm authority made those accusations seem absurd. He confirmed that Head never met me before the gala, never received any emails or communications, never planned any kind of staged rescue. When Roland asked why Head paid such an enormous sum for a stranger, Silas turned to face the jury directly and told them about his mother, Dorothy, about his own shameful behavior 35 years ago, about living with regret that could never be undone. His voice broke when he said, "I saw my worst moment reflected in Brett Mitchell's actions. I saw my mother's face in Mrs. Mitchell's devastation. I couldn't save Dorothy, but I could help Lorraine. Sometimes we get a chance to make right what we once made wrong, even if it's not our own wrong to fix." The courtroom was silent when Silas finished his testimony, and I saw several jurors wiping their eyes. Roland Pierce tried to discredit him during cross-examination, suggesting that a billionaire's grief was somehow less valid or that his help constituted inappropriate interference, but every question just made Silas seem more genuine and sympathetic while making Brett look worse by comparison. When Evelyn called Victor Pemberton to the stand, Brett's face went pale because he knew what was coming. Victor Pemberton was a powerful man who didn't appreciate being subpoenaed, and his testimony dripped with barely contained contempt for Brett. "Mr. Pemberton," Evelyn asked, "did you demote Brett Mitchell because of his mother's actions at the gala?" Mitchell because he had been falsifying client reports, cutting corners on due diligence, and demonstrating a pattern of unethical behavior that put our firm at serious risk. The gala incident simply accelerated a termination process that was already underway. He detailed specific instances of Brett's incompetence and dishonesty, painting a picture of a young man who'd been failing long before his mother supposedly ruined his career. Evelyn pressed further. "So the damage to Mr. Mitchell's career was self-inflicted, not caused by Mrs. Mitchell." Victor nodded firmly. "Entirely self-inflicted. In fact, the only reason I'd been hesitant to fire him earlier was my relationship with his late father, Gerald, whom I'd known professionally. I gave Brett far more chances than I would have given any other employee out of respect for Gerald's memory. The way Brett treated his mother that night showed me that my loyalty was misplaced, that the son had none of his father's character or integrity." Roland Pierce called Brett back to the stand for rebuttal, which turned out to be a catastrophic mistake. Evelyn's cross-examination was surgical in its precision, cutting through Brett's carefully constructed narrative with questions he couldn't answer without revealing his lies. "Mr. Mitchell, how much did your mother spend on your education over 10 years?" Brett mumbled. "I don't know exactly, maybe 50 or 60,000. Evelyn pulled out documented evidence, bank statements and receipts that her team had meticulously organized, and said, "According to these records, your mother spent $273,000 on your education, living expenses, and other needs. Were you aware of this?" Brett's face flushed as he admitted he hadn't known the exact amount, and Evelyn continued relentlessly, showing the jury exactly how much I'd sacrificed while Brett enjoyed a life he now claimed was somehow deficient. Then Evelyn moved in for the kill. "Mr. Mitchell, why did you really humiliate your mother at the gala?" Brett tried to stick to his script about it being a harmless joke, but Evelyn produced evidence from discovery, text messages between Brett and Sloane from the week before the gala, where Brett expressed anxiety about Victor Pemberton wanting to meet his family. In one message, Brett had written, "Victor wants to have dinner with my mom to understand my background and values. I'm panicking. My mom is so embarrassing with her cheap clothes and boring job. How do I keep him from seeing where I really came from?" Sloane had responded, "Can you avoid it? Say she's sick or something. V judges people by their families." Evelyn read these messages aloud, and Brett couldn't deny them because they were from his own phone, recovered during discovery. "So you weren't trying to honor your mother that night. You were trying to neutralize her as a threat to your image before your boss evaluation. Isn't that correct?" Brett's composure finally cracked as he tried to explain, to justify, to make it sound less calculated than it was. But every word made him look worse. Finally, under relentless pressure, he blurted out, "Fine. Yes, I was embarrassed. Sloane's family is wealthy, connected, everything I wanted to be part of. My mother with her thrift store clothes and her cleaning jobs didn't fit that image. I thought if I made a joke of her first, controlled the narrative, people would laugh with me instead of looking down on me for having a working-class mother. I didn't think she'd be so hurt. I didn't think about her at all, just about protecting my career." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs, and Judge Walters had to bang her gavel for order. Brett seemed to realize what Head admitted, tried to take it back, but Evelyn simply said, "No further questions, Your Honor," and sat down. The damage was done, and everyone in that courtroom now understood the truth. This wasn't about a mother who'd betrayed her son, but about a son so consumed by ambition and shame that Head publicly destroyed the woman who'd given him everything. Evelyn called 2 more witnesses who hammered the final nails into Brett's case. The first was Marcus Donnelly, Brett's former college roommate, who testified that Brett used to brag about his mother constantly during their freshman year, calling her a superhero for working multiple jobs and sacrificing so much. Marcus showed text messages from 2 years ago where Brett had asked him to lie about Brett's background if Sloane ever asked, to say the family had comfortable means rather than admitting his mother cleaned houses to pay his tuition. The second witness was Diana Foster, a former colleague at Donovan Capital Group, who reluctantly testified that Brett had once told her during a drunken happy hour that he wished his mother would just disappear so I could pretend I came from money like everyone else. For Evelyn's final piece of evidence, she displayed a photograph on the courtroom screens that made my breath catch in my throat. It was from Gerald's funeral 12 years ago, showing a 12-year-old Brett clinging to me while we both cried. Raw grief visible on both our faces. Someone had captured that moment of mutual devastation, mother and son holding each other because we were all each other had left. On the back of the photograph, in Brett's child handwriting, was written, "You and me forever, Mom. I'll always take care of you. Love, Brett." I hadn't seen this photograph in years, had forgotten it existed, and seeing it now destroyed me. Tears streamed down my face as I remembered that boy, my sweet boy who'd promised to take care of me, and wondered where Head gone, when Head disappeared, and been replaced by this stranger. Brett saw the photograph and something broke in him too. His face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw genuine emotion rather than performed grief. He covered his face with his hands, and his shoulders shook with sobs that echoed through the silent courtroom. Judge Walters let the moment sit. Let everyone absorb the contrast between the boy who'd written that message and the man who'd auctioned his mother for $1. "Finally," she said, "I think we've heard enough. Closing arguments will proceed tomorrow morning." Judge Walters delivered her preliminary ruling before closing arguments, her voice sharp with controlled anger. "I have presided over family law cases for 27 years, and rarely have I witnessed such a clear-cut case of betrayal and manipulation. Mr. Mitchell, you publicly humiliated your mother, then sued her when she refused to accept that humiliation as her due. Furthermore, evidence shows you or your counsel submitted falsified documents to this court in an attempt to support your fraudulent claims. I am dismissing your lawsuit with prejudice, meaning you cannot refile. I am also ordering you to pay Mrs. Mitchell's legal fees, which currently total $93,000. Brett's face went white, and Roland Pierce started to object, but Judge Walters cut him off. Additionally, I am referring this matter to the State Bar Association for investigation into potential ethics violations regarding the submission of forged evidence. Court is adjourned. The media coverage after the ruling was brutal for Brett but vindicating for me. Headlines proclaimed, "Judge destroys son's lawsuit against sacrificial mother and family. Lawsuit reveals son's cruel betrayal." The television programs that had given Brett sympathetic platforms now tore him apart, bringing in experts who analyzed his behavior as textbook narcissism and entitlement. Social media exploded with hashtag Team Lorraine trending worldwide, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of ungrateful children or sacrificial parents, turning my story into a cultural moment about family values and gratitude. Victor Pemberton released an official statement through Donovan Capital Group's Public Relations Department. After careful review of Brett Mitchell's conduct both professionally and personally, we have terminated his employment, effective immediately. Donovan Capital Group does not tolerate employees who demonstrate such profound lack of character and integrity. We apologize to Mrs. Lorraine Mitchell for any additional pain this situation may have caused her, and we commend her strength and dignity throughout this ordeal. The statement was posted on the firm's website and sent to every major business publication, effectively blacklisting Brett from the financial industry because no reputable firm would hire someone publicly condemned by Victor Pemberton. Brett's social collapse was equally swift and devastating. Former friends deleted him from social media, former colleagues refused to return his calls, former mentors publicly distanced themselves from him. Sloane Pemberton gave an interview to a lifestyle magazine where she painted herself as a victim of Brett's deception. "I'm ashamed I ever dated him. He presented himself as a devoted son from a loving family. And I believed him because I wanted to believe the best in people. What he did to his mother was unconscionable, and am grateful I discovered his true character before we became more seriously involved." The article included photographs of Sloane at charity events, rebuilding her own image as a discerning woman who'd narrowly escaped associating with someone so morally bankrupt. 6 weeks after the trial ended, Brett's life had completely unraveled. His landlord evicted him from the luxury apartment he could no longer afford, forcing him to move into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. Had applied to dozens of financial firms and been rejected by all of them, once background checks revealed the lawsuit and forgery scandal. His social circle had abandoned him, and his attempts to contact former friends went unanswered. He tried repeatedly to reach me through calls, texts, and emails, all of which I blocked because I wasn't ready to face him, wasn't sure it'd ever be ready. Then, a handwritten letter arrived at my office, forwarded by Harrington Global's mailroom, and curiosity made me open it despite my better judgment. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on cheap paper in Brett's familiar scrawl, and it began, "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just need you to know that I understand now what I did to you, what I destroyed, what I threw away for ambition and shame and stupidity. I'm living the life you lived for 12 years, working a warehouse job because it's all I can get, living in a studio apartment I can barely afford, eating cheap food and counting pennies for bus fare. It's only been a few weeks for me, and it's crushing. You did this for over a decade while raising a child, while grieving Dad, while maintaining your dignity and kindness. I threw all of that back in your face for $1 and a laugh. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so fucking sorry." The letter went on to detail his current circumstances and his realization of how privileged and entitled had been. But it didn't ask for anything, didn't beg for help or money, just expressed remorse and understanding. I read it 3 times and then locked it in my desk drawer, unsure what to do with either the letter or the complicated feelings it stirred. Silas found me in my office later that day, saw my expression, and asked what was wrong. I showed him Brett's letter, and he read it silently before handing it back. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I whispered, "I don't know. Part of me wants to help him because he's still my son. Part of me thinks helping him now would just enable more bad behavior, that he needs to hit rock bottom before real change is possible. And part of me is just so tired of thinking about this, of carrying the weight of his mistakes along with my own." Silas sat down across from me and said, "My mother never got a letter like this from me because I waited too long, convinced myself I'd apologize eventually when the time was right. She died before that time came. But that doesn't mean you have to respond now or ever. His redemption is his responsibility, not yours. You've already sacrificed enough." Around this same time, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Theodore Chen, Margaret's son, contacted me through Evelyn Cross and asked if he could meet me. Margaret had passed away 2 weeks earlier, and Theodore wanted to thank me for giving his mother hope in her final months. We met at a coffee shop near the marina. and Theodore told me his story of alienation and reconciliation. "I treated my mother terribly for 15 years," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I was embarrassed by her immigrant accent, her traditional ways, her small house in an unfashionable neighborhood. I built a successful tech company and pretended I'd done it alone, never mentioned her sacrifices. When she reached out to reconcile, I ignored her for months because I was too proud to admit I'd been wrong. Finally, I agreed to meet her. And we had 6 months together before the cancer took her. 6 months to try to make up for 15 years of cruelty." Theodore looked at me with eyes that had seen too much regret and said, "Don't wait too long like I did, not for Brett's sake, but for yours. The anger and hurt you're carrying will eat you alive if you let it. That doesn't mean you have to forgive him or let him back into your life. But you need to find peace with what happened, whatever that looks like for you. My mother forgave me, but she died before I could truly show her I'd changed, before I could prove I was worthy of that forgiveness. Don't let Brett's redemption timeline dictate your healing timeline, but also don't let bitterness consume you the way it almost consumed me." His words stayed with me long after he left, a gentle warning from someone who understood the cost of pride and the weight of regret. Meanwhile, my own life had transformed in ways I'd never imagined possible. 6 months after the trial, I'd been promoted to Director of Executive Operations at Harrington Global, a position that involved strategic planning and high-level coordination across the company's international divisions. I'd bought my own apartment, a beautiful space with large windows and hardwood floors that I'd decorated exactly how I wanted, without worrying about budget constraints. On weekends, I took art classes at a local studio, rediscovering the creative passion I'd abandoned when Gerald died, painting landscapes and abstracts that would never hang in galleries but brought me joy. I traveled to San Francisco for a business conference and stayed an extra weekend just to explore the city, something I'd never done before because there'd never been time or money for leisure. I'd built a circle of genuine friends, Judith from work who had coffee with me every morning and shared stories about her grandchildren, Evelyn who'd become a confidant and advisor on matters far beyond legal issues, and Silas who'd become the father figure I'd never had, offering wisdom and support without judgment or expectation. For the first time in my adult life, I felt valued for who I was rather than what I could provide, respected for my skills rather than pitied for my struggles, surrounded by people who chose to be in my life rather than people who felt obligated by blood or circumstances. I was 54 years old and finally becoming the person I'd always had the potential to be before life ground me down into survival mode. Brett, meanwhile, had taken a job as a clerk at a non-profit organization that helped formerly incarcerated individuals find employment, a position that paid barely above minimum wage but was the only organization willing to hire him given his damaged reputation. Head started therapy, according to a mutual acquaintance who reported back to Judith who mentioned it to me, working through issues of entitlement and shame with a counselor who specialized in personality disorders. Head moved from the motel to a small studio apartment that he shared with a roommate, riding the bus to work every day, living the kind of life I'd lived for years while Head enjoyed luxury paid for by my suffering. The mutual acquaintance said Brett talked constantly about his mother, about his regrets, about wanting to prove Head changed, but he never tried to contact me directly after that one letter, respecting my silence as the boundary it was meant to be. 9 months after the trial, I was having coffee at a small cafe near the marina on a Saturday morning, reading a book and enjoying the quiet, when Brett walked in. He didn't see me at first, focused on ordering at the counter, and I had a moment to observe him unseen. He looked different, thinner, tired, wearing clothes that had clearly been purchased at a discount store rather than designer boutiques. His hair needed cutting, and he moved with a kind of exhaustion I recognized from my own years of struggle. But there was something else, too. Something in his posture that seemed more real, less performative, as if the glossy veneer had been stripped away to reveal actual substance underneath. When he turned from the counter with his coffee, our eyes met across the crowded cafe, and he froze. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, and I saw a dozen emotions cross his face: shock, fear, hope, shame, longing. He started to turn away, assuming I didn't want to see him, and something in me that I didn't fully understand made me say, "Brett, sit down." He approached the table like he was walking through a minefield, carefully lowering himself into the chair across from me, his hands trembling as they wrapped around his coffee cup. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, and then I said the only thing I could think to say. "Why?" Brett's hands shook as he set down his coffee cup, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion that seemed genuine in a way nothing else about him had been for years. "I've asked myself that question every day since the gala, and the honest answer is ugly and pathetic. I was terrified. Victor Pemberton represented everything I wanted to be. Powerful, respected, born into privilege that I'd never have. When he mentioned wanting to meet you, to understand my background, I panicked because I knew you'd show him exactly what I'd been hiding. That I came from nothing, that my mother cleaned toilets to pay my tuition, that I wasn't the self-made success story I'd been pretending to be. I thought if I humiliated you first, controlled the narrative, made you a joke before you could make me look small, I'd protect the image I'd built. I thought your dignity was a threat to my career." He looked at me with eyes that held genuine pain rather than the performed emotion from the trial. "I didn't think about your feelings at all. You were just an obstacle, a problem to manage. I'd spent so long being ashamed of where I came from that I forgot you were a person, forgot everything you'd sacrificed, forgot that the woman I was mocking had given up her dreams so I could chase mine. When Silas bid that $1 million, I was furious because you'd embarrassed me, taken attention away from my event, made me look bad. It took losing everything before I could see how twisted my thinking had become. I listened without interrupting, watching this man who was my son, and also a stranger, trying to reconcile the child I'd raised with the person sitting across from me. When he finished, I said, "You hurt me in ways I didn't know were possible. My own son, the reason I'd survived everything after your father died, told the world I was worthless. You looked at 12 years of sacrifice and saw only something embarrassing to hide. You took every lonely night, every skipped meal, every aching muscle from 3 jobs, and you decided it was shameful rather than loving. How do I forgive that? How do I trust that this remorse isn't just another performance?" Brett's face crumpled, and tears streamed down his cheeks. "You can't. You shouldn't. I was a monster, Mom. I was so consumed by greed and ambition and toxic shame that I erased my own humanity, and I nearly destroyed yours in the process. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm not asking to be in your life because I haven't earned that right. I just need you to know that I see it now. I see what you did for me, what you gave up, what I threw away. I'm trying to become someone who deserves to be your son again, but I know that might take the rest of my life. And even then, you might never be able to look at me without seeing that night." We sat in silence again, and I felt the weight of 12 years of sacrifice pressing against 9 months of betrayal, trying to find balance on scales that might never be even. Finally, I said, "I still love you. That's the worst part. I love you even after everything, even though I don't like you very much right now, even though I don't trust you at all. You're still the boy I held at your father's funeral, the child I would have died for without hesitation. But that love doesn't mean I have to let you hurt me again. That love doesn't mean I owe you access to my life or my forgiveness." Brett nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I know. I understand that now. I spent 9 months working a warehouse job, counting pennies, eating ramen, and all I could think about was you doing this for over a decade while grieving and raising me alone." One of my coworkers, a guy named Ramon who's been working manual labor his whole life, asked me about my education. And when I told him about Hartwell University and my business degree, he just shook his head and said, "Man, someone loved you enough to make that possible. Don't forget that." He didn't know who I was or what I'd done, but that simple statement destroyed me because I'd not only forgotten, I'd punished you for it. He pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket pocket and set it on the table between us. "This is my therapy journal. Every day, I write about what I'm learning, what I'm facing about myself, how I'm trying to change. I'm not showing you this to prove anything, just to let you know that I'm doing the work, even if you never see the results. I didn't touch the notebook, but I acknowledged it with a nod. Brett continued. I'm not asking you to let me back into your life. I'm just asking you to know that I'm trying to become someone who deserves to call you mom again. However long that takes, if it's even possible, I'll keep trying. I looked at this broken man across from me and said something I'd spent months preparing in my mind. I can't forget what happened. The scars are too deep, and trust, once shattered like you shattered it, doesn't just grow back because someone wants it to. But maybe, in time, we can build something new. Not the relationship we had, because that's dead and gone, but something different. On my terms, at my pace, with boundaries that protect me. If you cross those boundaries even once, I'm done. No second chances, no explanations. Are those terms you can accept? Brett nodded vigorously, hope lighting his face for the first time. Yes. Anything. Any terms you want. I'll show up when you say. Leave when you say. Respect whatever limits you set. I won't ask for money or help or anything except the chance to show you I am changing. I considered his words, searching for manipulation or performance, but I saw only exhausted sincerity. Well, meet once a month for coffee, here, in public. Well, talk about how your life is going, your therapy, your work. We won't discuss my life or my work unless I choose to share. This isn't about rebuilding our relationship. It's about you showing consistent change over time. If you miss an appointment, if you ask me for anything, if you violate any boundary, we're done. Understood. Brett agreed immediately, gratitude and relief flooding his features. Over the next 18 months, we met once a month at that same cafe, and slowly, incrementally, I began to see genuine change in my son. He talked about therapy breakthroughs, about confronting his entitlement, about learning to value people based on their character rather than their status. He described his work at the nonprofit, how helping others who'd made serious mistakes gave him perspective on his own failings. He never asked me for anything, never pushed for more time or access, never made excuses for what had done. He listened when I occasionally shared pieces of my new life, congratulating me on my promotion without resentment, asking thoughtful questions about my art classes without making it about himself. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something like thawing. One afternoon, I sat in Silas' office discussing an international merger when he paused mid-sentence and asked, "How are things with Brett?" I told him about our monthly meetings, about the gradual change I was witnessing, about my uncertainty, whether I was being wise or foolish, in allowing even this limited contact. Silas leaned back in his chair and said, "I never got to give my mother another chance. She died hating me, or at least deeply disappointed in the man I'd become. You have the opportunity I never had, to see if redemption is real, if people can genuinely change. But remember, Lorraine, you owe him nothing. Whatever you choose to give is a gift, not an obligation. You've already paid your dues as a mother. Anything more is purely your choice." His words clarified something I'd been struggling with. I wasn't continuing these meetings for Brett's sake but for my own. I needed to see if the boy I'd raised was still in there somewhere. If the investment of 12 years had been completely wasted, or if some seed of that love and sacrifice might eventually bear fruit. I needed to know if my son was irredeemable or redeemable, not because his answer determined my worth, but because my curiosity required resolution. And I needed to prove to myself that I could engage with my past without being consumed by it, that I had enough strength and stability to face Brett without falling apart. 2 years after the gala, I stood at Gerald's grave on what would have been our 30th wedding anniversary, something I did every year to mark time and remember the man I'd loved. I talked to the headstone like I always did, updating him on our son and my life as if he could hear me from wherever death had taken him. I think I finally learned what you tried to teach me, Gerald, that I'm valuable with or without sacrifice, that my worth isn't measured by how much I can endure. Our son is learning that lesson too, slowly, painfully. He'll never be the boy we raised, but maybe he can become a man you'd be proud of. I'm trying to give him that chance without destroying myself in the process. I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me, and turned to see Brett approaching with flowers, white lilies that had been Gerald's favorite. Had asked permission to visit the grave on this anniversary, and Id agreed because it felt important that Brett reconnect with his father's memory. Remember the man whose death had started all of this. We stood together in silence for several minutes, and then Brett said quietly, "Dad would be proud of you, Mom. Everything you became, everything you survived, everything you built after he was gone. I'm trying to make him proud of me too, trying to become someone worthy of the sacrifices both of you made." I looked at my son, this imperfect, damaged man trying to climb out of the hole Had dug, and said, "Your father always loved you, Brett. Even when you disappointed him. Even when you made mistakes. That love never wavered. I'm learning that I can love you and still have boundaries, love you and still protect myself, love you and still demand better." That's what he would have wanted for both of us. Love that's healthy instead of destructive, love that builds up instead of tears down. Brett placed his flowers beside mine on Gerald's grave and whispered, "I'm sorry I forgot that for so long. I'm sorry I treated your love like it was worthless when it was the most valuable thing I'll ever receive." We stood there together, not quite reconciled but no longer at war. Two imperfect people trying to navigate the wreckage of a relationship nearly destroyed by pride and cruelty and shame. It wasn't healing. Not yet. But it was something like hope. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey from that gala stage to this moment of fragile peace. My son had auctioned me for $1, and a stranger had bid $1 million, but the real price had been learning that my worth was never up for auction in the first place. Id lost a son the night of that gala, but Id found myself buried under 12 years of exhaustion and sacrifice. And now, slowly, painfully, I was helping Brett find himself too, not because I owed it to him but because somewhere beneath the narcissist and the betrayer was still a piece of the boy I'd raised, and that boy deserved a chance to grow into something better. The story doesn't end with perfect reconciliation because real life isn't that neat. Brett and I continue our monthly meetings, building trust in millimeters rather than miles, learning to navigate a relationship forever changed by what happened. I thrive at Harrington Global, discovering talents I never knew I had, building a life rich with meaning beyond motherhood. Silas remains a mentor and friend, his own guilt about his mother driving him to ensure I never doubt my value again. And through it all, I carry the lesson that betrayal taught me. We teach people how to treat us, and accepting mistreatment isn't love, it's enabling. Some wounds heal, some scars remain, but surviving my son's betrayal taught me that I am not defined by what was done to me but by what I chose to become afterward. I chose strength over bitterness, boundaries over unlimited sacrifice, self-respect over the approval of someone who'd proven he didn't value me. And maybe, if Brett keeps doing the work, if he continues to change and grow, we might eventually build something worth calling a mother-son relationship. Or maybe we won't. And it'll be okay either way, because my worth doesn't depend on his redemption. The last thing I'll say is this. If you're watching this and you've been betrayed by someone you love, know that your pain is valid and your anger is justified. But don't let that betrayal define the rest of your life. Don't let someone else's cruelty turn you into someone cruel. Stand up for yourself, set boundaries, demand the respect you deserve, and never, ever accept mistreatment as proof of love. You are worth more than anyone's auction price, more than their opinion, more than their ability to see your value. You are worth what you know you're worth, and that's everything. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you sacrificed everything for? How did you rebuild after losing everything? What's your story of finding strength after devastation? Share your experiences in the comments below because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched you or made you think about family, sacrifice, and self-worth, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more true stories about resilience and redemption. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by how others treat them. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community where we believe that surviving betrayal doesn't make you weak. It reveals exactly how strong you've always been. Until next time, remember, you are valuable, you are worthy, and you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Never settle for less.